Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of the 5 to 9 podcast. You'll notice that it's not Kylie and Andrew with me today, but we are joined by Hayden Thorpe, former Wild Beasts frontman, now incredible solo artist. He will be joining us today just to talk about his new album and what he's got going on. Hayden, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm good, Carl. How are you, mate?
Yeah, really good. Just for a bit of context for listeners and viewers, um, how me and Hayden kind of came into contact was quite a strange series of events, I would say. Um, Obviously, big fan of your music for a long time. And then you ran a competition. I can't remember when it was now. Was it 2021, 2022? Basically pre-order your album, get entered into a raffle, and the prize was to basically go on a walk with yourself around your hometown in Kendal. And yeah, I was lucky enough to kind of win that, and we spent an amazing day climbing. Is it Loughrig Fell was the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, just amazing kind of day, that one. So that's kind of how we met and came into contact. But today,
It was a brilliant day, wasn't it? It was
yeah,
so much fun, and I was really happy that you came, and then it was you who won. It was just such a sweet, like, heartwarming afternoon. We won't talk about the fall.
yeah.
Silly conditions. Look, it happens to the best of us.
Oh,
Bad cob.
I'd put that to the back of my memory. I just remembered that now. War flashbacks. No, like you say, amazing day, and yeah, as the song goes, the universe is always right, as they say. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. It came right that day. Yeah.
perfect. So yeah, let's talk about the new album then. So over the years we've seen a lot of movie adaptations of books. But turning a book into an album feels much less common. Your new record Ness coming out on 27th of September. And for those that aren't aware, yeah, it's an adaptation of Robert Macfarlane's book of the same name, all about orphan Ness in Suffolk, which was the former Ministry of Defence weapons development site during both the World Wars and Cold War. And in 1993 was bought by the National Trust. So it's now this, from what I can see from the photos, this really stark kind of coastal nature reserve. And I guess I want to know straight off the bat, how the project came about and what it was about Robert's book and also the place Salford Ness that you found so inspiring.
Well, I didn't know about Alfred Ness, and I didn't know about Ness or the book before I met Rob Macfarlane. Just when we met in the Lake District, I had kind of recently ended up back there, not through plan. It was through accident, through kind of pandemic-induced collapse, calamities, different life, things not going to plan. And I ended up back up in the fells, and I at first felt very isolated and I was kind of filled with all these cityisms, like I'm somehow disconnected and have failed in my great ascension in life to have ended up back in the wild, as it were. So it was a bit of a headfuck to end up in the space that I grew up, which we always associate somehow as leaving the nest and going forth and finding our riches and kind of just kind of being on the constant ascension. So to be back there felt like I was grounded and back to square one. And I found a Robert Macfarlane book on the shelf that my brother had given me pretty soon after being back up there. And just the way he just inspired, his language just inspired me to reimagine where I was and to recontextualize living there. His books tend to be very factual, but they also kind of impart a real spirituality. I don't know if you'd like me to even say that, but he captures an essence about nature that is beyond humanistic. He captures it for his own sake, or for its own sake, rather than kind of personalizing it or assuming it has some kind of humanistic quality. He dignifies it with entirely its own quality. And once I kind of got my head around that, I kind of felt the company of the fells and the surrounds, and all of a sudden felt very fortunate that I had this exclusive access to this kind of beautiful space, because the lakes were shut down at the time too. No one could go anywhere. So it's kind of extraordinary time to be up there. And yeah, Rob is the patron of Kendal Mountain Festival, and I wrote to Kendal Mountain Festival because it happens 5 minutes from where I was living, and I just said, "Look, if I can be of any service here, I'd love to be involved." And they immediately put me in touch with Rob, and we just got talking, and we came up with this idea of creating an improvised performance where Rob reads and I make music or play some music alongside his reading. And we decided to do Ness, and that was just a really magical night. It just kind of happened so beautifully. I played some kind of Morricone-like cowboy guitar music, these readings. And out of nowhere, we had the startings of something that felt worth really pursuing.
Yeah, so I mean, did some of that from that festival performance make it into the album then?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for a start, I tuned my guitar to it's a baritone guitar.
Right, yep.
So it's a strange kind of like, the advantage of using a baritone guitar is it's of lower pitch than a regular guitar. And because I tend to sing high, it creates this quite expansive sound palette where my kind of gentle, more haunting vocal is then juxtaposed with something quite gritty and quite gnarly. And there's
oddly complements it. Yeah,
exactly. There's something about that dissonance that just felt right about this project, and the fact that, as you said, Orford Ness is a Ministry of Defence weapons development site, or once was, where they put together kind of the nuclear arsenal and developed horrifying kind of artifacts of war, but has since been overtaken by the National Trust and been rewilded. So it has this kind of dissonant history, and the music felt very kind of, that sonic palette felt very fitting of that. And I came up with a strange tuning just when I started riffing these ideas, and that tuning stuck. So the same tuning has been used throughout the whole record, just one singular tuning, and that very much became, the kind of genesis of the album. I think when in my experience, when you're going to make an album, you always have to, there always has to be something that happens in your mind where you you imagine something that wasn't there before. And it's a very you call it like a eureka moment or an awakening type moment, but somehow there's a realization of something that you feel hasn't been done before, or you would like to make something for yourself that no other music service is for you. You see a space for yourself, basically, on basic terms. And I felt there was a space for this strange English desert music. And I thought, who else is going to spend 10 months making a strange album about a ex-Ministry of Defence weapons site off of Suffolk? Hey, I'm the guy for that.
That's it. That's in your wheelhouse. Fantastic. And one of the tracks that was obviously come from that, the lead single that our Spotify listeners would have heard at the top of the interview, a song that every time I hear it just grows on me more and more with each listen. Tell us a bit about that song and why you chose it as like the first taste for Ness.
I think it distilled the feeling I got from Ness when I first went. Because I was working on the record for 9 months before I got to actually visit Orford Ness.
Oh, yeah.
And when I did end up going, it was with Rob McFarlane, and it's like his Graceland. It's like he's Elvis within this strange dystopian Graceland. And yeah, it felt a real honor to be there. And he really kind of set it alight for me, excuse the pun, as this important space that is in some ways an experiment. It's a rewilded space in the very environment where we invented the dangerous future we now live within. You know, the kind of weaponized, the weaponized apocalypse that we are now capable of was kind of developed there. Mm-hmm. Now the fact that it's been rewilded and kind of is a non-human space really felt very powerful to me and palpably kind of inspiring. So when I got back from Ness that day, that just kind of, that plinky plonky like rhythm kind of emerged when I was there. And once I transposed that to a drum machine, it just kind of felt how I felt that day. The song feels how I felt that day. And I wrote it very quickly. That's always a good sign of a lead track, is if you write it quickly, I think, because it feels like an instinctual happening.
Almost, natural kind of coming together.
I think you're right. I think singles, people tend to choose instinctual songs as singles because that instinctual feeling, will carry easily to someone else.
100%. And like I say, more I play it, more it just grows on me, that song. So yeah, I mean, Ness, this will be your third solo album. You've had obviously a couple of EPs in between that too. Feels like you're very quickly, getting to the stage where you'll soon have as much solo material as obviously Wild Beast discography. So I mean, 5 years into the transition, how have you found the adaptation from band member to solo artist? Do you feel more comfortable and confident now as a solo artist than you did when you were making, say, Diviner right at the start?
I'm not just saying this for saying its sake, but it instantly felt okay to me. Like there wasn't any thinking of it needing to be another way. I think when you're in a band, a band is such an extraordinary way of arranging human beings. Like it's such a strange arrangement. It's not a family, but it is a family. Often it's not a relationship, but it is a relationship.
Yeah.
An intimate relationship. In our case, it was a brotherhood. It was a connection to place, a connection to history, a connection to a culture. We shared a lot. And the one aspect of that kind of way of living is that you're around people a hell of a lot. Your entire working life is collective. Your entire kind of decision-making process is collective. You sleep in the same rooms. You awake in the same rooms. It's very kind of extraordinarily intimate. So having been in that arrangement for half my life, half my existence, I felt a great need to kind of be on my own for great stretches of time, really, just to kind of feel what that felt like. That felt like an adventure, actually, an inward adventure. I think I had to get a lot better as a musician. I think I've improved immensely in the past 5 years just as a musician, because you don't have anything to lean on, and therefore your expression becomes a lot more singular, and the details have to be exactly correct, because you can impart the wrong thing very easily by being a bit slack or a bit lazy or a bit unmindful. So yeah, I'd say I probably worked harder in the last 5 years than I've ever worked, and it's become even more of an obsession than it was before, which
Yeah.
wasn't a thing that I thought would happen. I can't say it's easier. It's not harder. Um, but yeah, I mean, now kind of I'm more fascinated by bands than ever because I'm not in one, and I live by proxy through my mates who are in bands.
Yeah. He was still doing it, yeah.
Yeah, but I guess I feel very thankful to the guys because like they pushed me as a writer and as a musician to such an extent. Their excellence and their striving, their ambition pushed me on. So I carry a lot of gratitude for kind of the maker I am today.
100%. I mean, you can definitely hear that coming through as well. I mean, I'd say the 3 records you have made too, I find they're all very different flavors. Diviner, this, stripped back, stark, beautiful breakup record, just you and the piano. Moon Dust for My Diamond, a lot more synths and funky instrumentation coming through. And now, from what I gather and what I've heard so far from Ness, you've collaborated with composers, some orchestral and choral arrangements. Obviously, you mentioned Ennio Morricone coming through as well. Was that a deliberate choice for each project to be so sonically different to the previous one, or has it just been, this is where the inspiration and the subject matter has led me?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this because, to quantify your music is a useful thing in the modern age. It helps with algorithms, it helps with brand positioning. And sometimes I wish I was more singular. But the truth is, after I made Diviner and sat at a piano for a year, I wanted a guitar in my hand, or I wanted another sonic palette. I think, and if you think about my favorite writers, my favorite music makers, the song is always king, like the song or queen. The song is monarch of all. So you have to, rather than it being a sonic choice, it's a song choice. And there are various ways that a song can evolve, but you have to stay sensitive and curious about what that song can bring. And I think a lot of the best writers, in my opinion, their songs are so singular that they can be kind of expressed in the most minimal form or in the most kind of extravagant form, but they carry a thread of that personality and that intention.
Yeah.
And I think I don't strive for that, but I have relinquished control to that process. That I feel less in control of it than maybe I should be. And often in circumstance and environment determine the making of a record so much, and that's what's beautiful about them is it's kind of an interaction with space and time, and those things change. And I mean, it's something I ask myself quite a lot. I think Ness is probably in between the two of them, Diviner and Moon Dust.
Yeah.
Kind of finds itself more kind of classically minimalist like Diviner, but with a few more kind of sonic embellishments and a kind of bit more of a wider palette.
Awesome. Yeah, like you said, it's kind of almost like that snapshot of you at that moment in time. Each record, you can definitely hear that coming through as well.
Yeah.
So obviously we've spoken about what you have coming up, but I also wanted to just touch on like some of the other stuff you've been doing since the last record. Most recently, you just worked with Hot Chip's Joe Goddard on his new album Harmonics, which by the time this interview goes up will have been named our album of the month for July.
Oh, okay.
Your collaboration Summon, one of our favorites from the record. You also worked with him previously on Unknown Song as well. Great track that kind of came out of lockdown. Tell us a little bit about working with Joe on those songs. And, as a fan of both you and him, could you ever see, the two of you releasing like an EP or even, even a full length project together?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, me and Joe, for whatever reason, we're a very natural fit. I have to say,
Yeah.
like, it's effortless. Both songs emerged pretty much fully formed on contact, which is quite rare, really, especially Summon, which so rarely happens that he sent me the entire recorded music and I just wrote the entire song directly onto his music. No edits, no adjustments, just verse 1, chorus, verse 2, chorus, middle 8, last chorus, outro. And yeah, I love that. That's kind of what you do it for, is that moment of synergy and yeah. I mean, he's a master. I learned a lot working with him. No one makes work louder than Joe. Like the volume in the studio is ridiculous. And he's so instinctual. Like you don't know he's a mad scientist. Like you don't know what's going to happen, and you think he's doing something way off, and then all of a sudden he'll turn a few dials, and it's kind of the whole track starts sizzling, and you can't. It's a real kind of example of mastery of mind and machine, where he can manipulate his kind of expression through his equipment and his apparatus. So that's what makes it so kind of beautiful to be a part of. Yeah, it's I have to say it's been a joy both times. So yeah, I'd love to work with Joe again. I mean, it's yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing to hear. So yeah, we're about halfway through then. So we're going to jump into another track, which this time is which is the latest single you've just released, and that you accurately described to me as a hip wobbler, which it most certainly is. Really kind of mesmerizing music video too. Tell it, before we go into this one, tell us a bit about this track, and excuse the corniness, how he came to be.
Yeah, obviously what's new to me is when I would previously write songs, or have written most of my material, it's from drawing things from within, somehow kind of taking something from inside and bringing it outside. Because Ness existed as a book and Robert McFarlane's words were kind of the starting point for the songs, it was a case of bringing something outside in. So I already got to start with a feeling, which helps a lot. And as soon as I read the words for for some reason, I just felt this kind of like Rolling Stones type attitude coming up, this kind of like couldn't give a fuck slackness, this like,
yeah,
it just felt, yeah, kind of like pirate music. And yeah, and I just kind of explored a bit, like, what is the sonic world of Rolling Stones? And actually early Rolling Stones, it shouldn't work. Like the beauty of it is it shouldn't work. It's so opposed to how modern music is produced and mixed. You know, you've got your bass and drum, the entire drum kit and bass on one side of your ears. You've got the vocals and guitar on the other side of the ears. And somehow that combination actually makes it hang together in such a slack and like committed way. You know, you have to commit to their feel.
Yeah,
it's not correct, but it's like it lives in its own kind of like in its own attitude. So I was kind of exploring that, and how the drums are kind of quite set back and the guitar is kind of the main kind of leading instrument. So that was kind of like the feel. And then yeah, on top of that, the riff kind of emerged. And yeah, I took some of that kind of sonic interplay with me. So the bass is on one side, and you know, the palette is quite kind of derivative of that era. Yeah, and yeah, it was a it was a big undertaking as a song to make. It just was very hungry. It was probably the most audacious production I've ever been a part of. I mean, it has a sackbut on it, which is an early trombone. It's a kind of a 17th century trombone. It's got a spinet on it, which is an early version of a piano. So you've got these orchestral instruments with kind of this very modern synths and kind of modern recording techniques. So it became a real haunted house for the ear. It's like, whoa, what's coming here? And I kind of thought, am I overdoing this? Like, is this too much? Like, is this too spicy? You know, it's one of those like tastes where it's spicy, salty, sweet, all at once. And the more you amp one thing up, the more you've got to amp the rest of it up. And somehow, if they weren't all equally powerful, it would be terrible. So it was kind of a learning curve as a song that the more you give it, the more it kind of works. No,
it's a really fascinating track, and as you say, it's kind of got that timeless swagger about it, in the way it kind of struts along. So, and alongside obviously the release of that single, you did announce that you and Robert McFarlane will perform together at King's Place in London next year, February the 7th. Just wondering, what can people expect from that show, and do you have plans to do, any more touring throughout 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. There'll be a UK tour in 2025, and Europe. I mean, the show will be kind of for me, a new kind of sonic palette. Like, I'll be playing with an orchestral bass drum player, Delia Stevens, and Jack McNeil playing his clarinet, and Rob will be doing some reading. I mean, we're so accustomed to the kind of bass drums, guitar type lineup that we don't kind of deviate too much from it. And you kind of come to realize that the technology, like PA systems and the venues themselves, they've all evolved together. And when like any ecosystem evolves together, they kind of end up serving each other and kind of falling into harmony, basically. So it's quite interesting to bring these other instruments into that kind of environment. I mean, an orchestral bass drum, if you've ever been in close proximity to one, is just the most terrifying instrument. I mean, when I was marking up the track names as I was recording them, it'd be things like T-Rex drum. You feel like you're in like
Jurassic Park.
You really feel that kind of like Spielberg moment where the T-Rex foot comes down in the mud, and it's a really kind of, it's exhilarating kind of experience to be around those sounds, and such a beautiful thing for me to engineer too. I'd never kind of gotten so much satisfaction out of mics, like to kind of properly capture the essence of this instrument. It's hugely gratifying, and I think having been lucky enough over the years to have been in a weird band that a great record label took a risk on enough to make proper albums in proper ways in proper studios, ways that are now deemed to be kind of old world in a way. I first recorded to tape and all these ways. I have fortunately picked up kind of some of these kind of like formalized methods of how you capture the sound. So and Jack McNeil as a clarinet player, I mean, I didn't have any experience of clarinet other than being played in horrifying ways through kind of music room doors in school. So I went from being kind of having a bit of an aversion to the instrument in truth to actually being totally besotted with it and understanding that it's a very, very soulful beautiful instrument. And I guess we're more used to sax being used in pop music. It's a very metallic sound, sax.
Yeah.
And quite piercing, which is why it works in pop songs, because it can really kind of cut through and hold its own. Careless Whisper has a lot to answer for in that regard.
Yeah.
But the clarinet is made of wood. So if the sax is about city songs, the clarinet occupies the same space, but it seems to be of the natural world.
Countryside equivalent.
Yeah, the wilds, as it were, and played as beautifully as Jack plays. Yeah, I mean, Jack plays with the best. You know, he recently toured with Philip Glass in the States, around the world. So when you have someone with that level of mastery over their instrument, it can only ever enhance the experience of the song.
Yeah.
So it's going to be great to kind of play with those guys in rooms and I hope allow the audience also to kind of experience these incredible instruments in unusual ways. Less formal ways. I guess we distinguish classical instruments as being somehow more formalized and existing somehow in a more, I guess, a posher approach.
Yeah.
And I think there's more to be had here in that sense.
Definitely show a different side to those instruments and arrangements, as you say. So yeah, I mean, go back to some of your other recent ventures. One of them being an art installation that you've just done at the Glass House in Newcastle over the summer, called The Hide, which I know has just finished now at the end of July, inspired by a bird hide, obviously from your hometown in Kendal. Again, just wanted to know, how did that come about? And, now that it's run its course, what feedback did you get from people who did go along and experience the hide while it was there?
Yeah, I have to say that was just from start to finish, just such an amazing experience, because, as someone who has been lucky enough to make music for most of their adult life, you're used to your music kind of usually being reduced to, a square on a phone, or ideally maybe an LP. It's kind of compressed into this kind of physical object. So when I saw the Hide installation and saw this building that had been built for my music, it was just an overwhelming thing, actually, to be within this wooden space that, and it blew open my kind of process as to what music is for. The whole thing was based on a bird hide outside of Kendal that I was visiting around the time we first met. I used to go to this bird hide most days and just watch the bird life, drift in and out of concentration, and just be quiet, just kind of be still. And the door was open there. People could come and go. Sometimes there were people in there, sometimes there weren't. And if you think about like the way we've built our towns and cities, there aren't spaces within them where you can kind of be private but publicly. I don't go to church. Not many people go to church on the whole now. So that kind of space of worship or that space of protection is less common unless you're buying something.
Yeah.
Paying to be there. So the hide felt like it was kind of serving a purpose for what I required, which is to be among people potentially, or to have an open door to people, but also kind of put myself aside and concentrate on something bigger than me, beyond me, not a God, but kind of
higher power.
Yeah, exactly. So, and there was music emerging at the time, and I just kind of sectioned off that that music that emerged around that time and said, well, that's music for the Hyde. That's music that kind of came out of that feeling in that moment. And basically, I just transplanted that into kind of, next to the Tyne River overlooking Newcastle, and, from the Gateshead side. And, having been a Newcastle fan my entire life, there was a beautiful kind of circular sense of making work in Newcastle for people of Newcastle and who I already felt a great kinship with, affiliation with. Cumbria, where I grew up, is very much kind of defers to the Northeast as its kind of big brother, as it were.
Well, you mentioned obviously Newcastle United there. For those that didn't know beforehand, obviously you're a diehard Newcastle United supporter. I think it was last season I saw where you got invited onto the pitch to take a penalty at half time. Obviously no European football this season, which I think is what maybe hampered Newcastle slightly last year. The transfer window hasn't gone as planned either. How do you feel about Newcastle's chances this season? Are you feeling confident?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't lost players in the transfer window, so I'll take that. I mean, there's still a couple of days left, so
yeah.
I think it's like the realities of like modern football are quite strange, aren't they? We're living in a kind of hyper-real football time where, there's huge money, but somehow there's no money. Or,
yeah.
The VAR aspect of it, that what's real time, and I think, Newcastle, the club itself, has found it, we find ourselves kind of in that dilemma of modern football, where on one side, previously Ashley sucked the soul out of the club for his own devious means, only to be replaced by, a kind of a set of people who at heart had good intention for the club, but ultimately the money is not legitimate money. The money is associated with kind of pretty explicit human rights issues and other undoings of the modern world. And at the heart of it, there's a city that just really loves its football and loves its football club, and that's the value there. That's the kind of something undescribably important and kind of connective in that. So, I've been a Newcastle fan for long enough now to not think of seasons as good or bad.
Yeah,
they're just seasons. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It teaches. I think being a Newcastle United fan teaches you humility in a really important way. I mean, I often wonder what if we had a kind of Man City era, if we had that kind of level of exponential kind of increase in success, and how I would identify with that. How would that sit with me?
Yeah.
I think I think there's a lot to play out yet in those terms as to what, I know you mentioned the transfer market, and a lot of the interplay of that was to do with kind of keeping on side with the financial fair play. All I'll say is that there's the over 100 cases against City, none of which have been answered yet, and we may yet see a kind of a huge changing of the winds in the winds as well as the winds.
Yeah.
How we see these things.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. And I know as a Manchester United fan, I've kind of had the opposite of, he talks about City's trajectory. We've almost kind of had the reverse of that. But again, we had the Glazers in charge, and now we've got Ineos that seem to be, at least owners that actually care about the club a bit more and want to see it go in the right direction. So yeah, it's interesting from my side as well, looking at Manchester United, see what's going to happen this year.
It's a funny one because, like, having been a kid during the kind of, United treble winning years,
yeah,
I can't help but feel like I watch all the kind of shows about that era. I can't help but feel nostalgic about it, and I hate myself for it. You can't help but feel that somehow the feeling of that team and those players did become part of our consciousness.
Yeah.
That it meant something, and that kind of, I guess that band of brothers, that collection of people who were from those humble beginnings that kind of banded together and made something more than the sum of their parts. And they were somehow, they were hugely skillful players, but none of them were kind of like, other than maybe Giggs and maybe Beckham's particular specialities, none of them were kind of spectacular in what they offered, but they were so kind of, they meant it so much that they seemed to make magic happen. And that's the romance that I miss now in modern football.
Yeah.
I miss that. Like, yeah, they earned a lot back then. Of course they did, but the money now is absurd, and the trappings seem to come almost before the kind of the desire to win.
Yeah. No, I mean, I watched the Amazon recent 99 documentary that they did, thinking, I didn't need another documentary on the treble, but I watched it anyway. But I don't like to be the guy who watches it and be like, football's not the same. But I was watching that back, and I'm like, God, it really was a different time, different playing field, as you say.
Yeah, it was.
So yeah, that was football. I was wondering as well. Like, I remember when we were taking our walk around Loughborough Fell, we were talking about music and what we had been listening to at the time. And I know at that moment in time, I was really blown away by Black Country New Road record, Ants from Up There. And I was just wondering, a couple of years later, 2024, have you had any musical highlights this year? What is it you've kind of been listening to?
To be honest, because of the tight turnaround with Ness, extraordinarily tight turnaround, because we had a deal with the National Trust to perform the album or launch the album.
Right.
And the whole thing got out of hand to such a degree that I, every waking hour was spent obsessing over it, that I barely have kind of lifted my head above the trenches in that sense. So I'm the worst person in the world to comment. I've kind of just been making my own pudding and eating it. It's pretty gross over here.
No worries. I'd definitely say, I know you get on with the Everything guys. Definitely their new record is one that I've really enjoyed this year.
Yeah, their record is amazing.
So obviously we've not mentioned Wild Beasts yet, but I've had a question from 5 to 9 editor Andrew Bell, who's also a big fan of the band and yourself. And it's interesting, we've had a discussion before about our favourite Wild Beasts records, and interestingly his favourite is the debut Limbo Panto, which, as you know, is actually my least favourite, although I still love it, obviously. But he says, although it is often seen as a immature first draft of what the band would become, he's always been drawn to that more raw and unpolished version of the band that was kind of laid out on that record. And his question was just really, he just wants to know your thoughts on that first album, and obviously where would you place it in, you know, the terms of your discography?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of affection for it. I'll say that. And I think it's kind of properly been almost I think it's been reevaluated almost. I think I've reevaluated it, and people often mention it to me now more than ever before.
Yeah.
I mean, I had Robert McFarlane talking about it to me recently, you know.
Oh, really?
Just talking about the words in it, and the words are absolutely bonkers. Like, it literally is a language, you know, that it's a kind of, it has its own kind of like grammatical rules. It's something, and I have to say, I see it as, you know how when an island breaks off, say New Zealand, and how there's no flying birds on New Zealand. There's no native flying birds. They're all ground birds because it broke off from the mainland, and these animals went really weird. Weird things happen. Australia itself, marsupials, you know.
Yeah.
You got, you know, platypuses, you know, which is basically a badger with a beak that lays eggs.
Yeah.
You know. So if you isolate things, they tend to manifest weird adaptions. And Limbo Panto was born out of an extraordinary kind of collective obsession of basically from the age of 16 to 22, rehearsing 4 nights a week in cold, damp basements in northern towns and cities. And I guess it was, as often adaptions are, an extraordinary kind of flourish of flamboyance. Like, was it a huge peacock presentation of, like, you know how when apologies to keep using the animal analogies when I'm speaking about wild beasts, but
it's fitting.
Well, you know how, like, I think this is maybe, I've never thought of this before, maybe it's over rich, but you know how a wildebeest will prance when a lion is chasing it to let it know that it's got enough energy to do like a little cheeky skip. It felt like that in these hyper-masculine, very grey, quite severe environments, that this was the most kind of fuck you we could be. It's a protest record, really, you know. And I think what makes it so powerful for me is it really is a kind of a record about masculinity. But, you know, I hear records now that people say, oh, the maker says this is about masculinity, it's about toxic masculinity, whatever that is, or, you know, this is about being a man. It's like, well, why does it sound so shouty and aggressive then? Like, masculinity is a broad spectrum of expressions in emotion, and it's about masculinity for the very fact that it's kind of more effeminate, typically effeminate, or not typically hetero.
Yeah.
It dares to be even sensual. Like, you know, here is 4 men daring to actually be sensual, for God's sake. If it's somehow a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
So I'm really proud of it. And I could never make anything like it again, because I could never have lived how we lived again. You know, it's the result of incredible intensity.
Yeah.
That you can only actually endure once a lifetime.
Yeah.
And keep your sanity, which maybe we didn't.
No, I mean, I remember, obviously, that was the record. I remember seeing you support Foals during that.
Yes.
I think it was either just before or just after the album came out in Lincoln.
Yeah.
And that was kind of my introduction to you guys. Yeah. And I just remember being like, this is like nothing I've heard before. And I think even looking back now, it's almost like there is nothing like sounding like that record that I can think of. I think that's still the appeal to it for me, is that it's so different to anything else at that time and even now, that you kind of hear. And like you say, it was very special in that sense, I would say. So yeah, obviously I've taken up a lot of your time. So one final question. It was the 15th anniversary of Two Dancers recently. So moving on to album number 2. I know you did a post on your socials about the record, and just looking at some of the comments, the love and appreciation for not just that album, but Wild Beasts as a band in general. And for me, we're talking about the animal analogy, but I've always had this strange analogy with that band where I see you like the musical equivalent of Breaking Bad. There's, that show had 5 seasons, got bolder and more confident with each new season, never dropped in quality. If anything, it only got better. And, yes, financially, maybe it would have made sense for Vince Gilligan to do more of that. But I think when its legacy is cemented and, we get something like Better Call Saul, which is its own thing, to the same incredible standard, artistically, why do we need to return to Breaking Bad for season 6, when that story has ultimately been told? And, when I've spoken to Andrew and other people about Wild Beasts, and they're like, obviously we're seeing it with Oasis this week, and they're like, oh, do you want Wild Beasts to get back together? I'm always like, when I hear what you're creating and also what Tom's creating with your solo material, for me personally, I love it just as much as the stuff that you guys made together. But I'm still curious from your perspective, when those anniversaries come around for the albums and you reflect on the band, you see what it means to people and the enduring power that it has. How do you feel looking back on that time? And, from yourself, is there ever that desire to return, or are you quite content in the same way, that chapter's done?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't look back very often, is the truth of it. But at the same time, it's really important to, to mark the years since kind of albums, because they're such huge undertakings. They're kind of like birthdays and wedding days and
yeah,
funerals and all kinds mashed into one. They're really kind of, a real kind of symbolic thing in your life. They're really powerful kind of pillars in your life, both as a maker and a listener, aren't they? They kind of really become anchors as to how you kind of make sense of your life. So, and that doesn't change. I mean, I have less of a kind of factual memory about them and more of a sense memory. And I mean, like I say, that being in a band is an extraordinarily intense and all-consuming experience. If you do it in an uncynical and really kind of heartfelt way, as we did, I have to say we always did. It was a very kind of principled enterprise. We weren't fucking in it for the money.
Yeah.
And I think that came through in records like Limbo, Panto, where we were really making this work because we really truly believed that we had a point to make that hadn't been made before, and that there was a way of making music as a band that was a step on from what we're usually experiencing. So, I don't think we were clever careerists. I think we probably could have done with a bit more nous in that respect. But, time tends to be very, I kind of, perhaps if I'm going to be kind of realistic about kind of the music industry, and as someone who is forever in love with new music and the very existence of art has often required someone to go to extraordinary lengths to even get it in the world, never mind kind of, have people listen to it. When I first signed a record contract, Spotify didn't exist. And so the whole mechanism is changed extraordinarily. And not for the worse, not for the better, it's just changed. It completely changed. It's like, and I think in modern culture, we're making it up as we go along. Like we don't actually know how bands are supposed to behave, or like what's the normal routine. And I think we're becoming more familiar with actually reforming being the norm. Like it's almost now part of the kind of like
the cycle.
It is kind of like a passage of rites almost,
Yeah.
So I can't envisage it happening, to be honest, but that's not for any kind of hostile reasons, other than the purity with which we did it would be, or we'd have to find another way of achieving that level of purity. But also, I think time will tell. Time is very forgiving of albums. I've been in the game long enough for records to have been heralded as like the great thing, and now they're not often mentioned. And equally, records that were, absolutely terrorized as atrocities to music, are now kind of deemed to be kind of breakthrough moments in culture. I mean, even myself, when I was kind of looking for a picture from that era to use, I came across a review I hadn't read before because it probably wasn't presented to me, because it actively derided Two Dance. Really, really like put it to bed with a hot water bottle.
Wow.
It was quite damning, and it's probably a good job I didn't read it at the time. And there were several quite kind of mainstream pannings of Two Dances. But we made people make a decision, for God's sake, and like I still strive to do that now. Ness has done that, making a record as singular and as kind of strange as Ness, and I think that's kind of what I feel that is like my responsibility as a maker, is to continue to make singular, not strange, but music that's made onto its own terms. And we're encouraged even more now to kind of find the algorithm, find the kind of the shortest path to the biggest point. And I can't quite make that sit with my own reasons for doing it, and to make work of the excellence I want to make it requires so much kind of heavy lifting on your guts that I could only do it if I kind of had a reserve of love and energy for it that won't run out, and I have that. Yeah, so it's a long-winded answer. I mean, what I can tell you is if we could sell out 5 Wembleys, we definitely would refund. Now, I'm not precious about that. Yeah,
that's great. Well, that's all I had in terms of questions. Thank you so much for your time today. Great chatting with you as always. So yeah, this for everyone, in case you missed it earlier on, Ness is out on the 27th of September. I know I can't wait to hear that record. Hayden will also be performing with Robert McFarlane in London, 7th of February. Definitely get down to that if you're London way, or if you want to make the trip down. I'm contemplating it myself after hearing that you describe what's going to be the setup for that one. And yeah, just thank you very much for your time, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, thanks, Carl. Thanks so much.